Rejection-sensitive dysphoria, also known as RSD, is a term that describes an emotional response many neurodivergent people know all too well, even if they've never had a label for it. It's that sudden drop in your stomach when someone says, "Hey, can we talk later?" It's that flash of dread when you see a message preview and your brain fills in the worst possible outcome before you've even opened it. It's the heat in your face after making a small mistake, one that probably didn't even register for anyone else. Your whole system reacts to criticism as though you've done something deeply wrong, sometimes even before anything's happened. It's the anticipation that hurts as much as the event itself. The bracing, the scanning, the instinct to apologize before you know what for. And it can be triggered by things that seem incredibly minor from the outside. A short reply, a delayed response, someone glancing at their phone while you're speaking, a shift in tone, a furrowed brow, even a neutral phrase like, "I want to give you some feedback," can cause your brain to go into full red alert mode. That's the thing about RSD. It doesn't always wait for rejection to actually happen. It's wired to anticipate it, to try and beat it to the punch. The emotional reactions that follow can be overwhelming. They might look like shutting down, going silent, fixating, over-apologizing, explaining too much, or withdrawing entirely. For some people, it looks like anger, irritability, a desperate need to defend yourself before you've even been accused. None of these responses are coming from nowhere. They come from experience, often years of it. For many neurodivergents, RSD is a learned response to being misunderstood, corrected, excluded, and emotionally punished in subtle, daily ways. We grow up being told we're overreacting, that we're too much, too intense, too sensitive, and over time, we absorb that as a truth. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist. Today, we're going to explore how your body adapts to that kind of environment, how it scans constantly for signs that rejection might be coming, and how it's a reaction to not just one moment, but the weight of hundreds of previous moments layered underneath it. RSD doesn't come out of nowhere. You don't wake up one day hypervigilant to feedback or afraid of being misunderstood. You become that way over time, usually in response to repeated interpersonal judgment, criticism, and exclusion, especially in environments that punished your difference instead of trying to understand it. For many neurodivergent people, childhood was confusing and disorienting. You were asked over and over again, "Why are you like this?" but never given a real answer. You got the message early: don't take up space, don't be too loud, don't be too quiet either. Don't be messy, don't be intense, don't need anything inconvenient. So you start watching yourself closely. You rehearse what you're going to say before you say it. You shrink when you sense disapproval. You become an expert in editing yourself in real time, especially around people who hold power over you. Parents, teachers, bosses, sometimes even friends. That constant pressure teaches your nervous system to associate visibility with risk. Just existing in your natural state without filtering or correcting starts to feel dangerous. And that's not an exaggeration. The body internalizes social pain the same way it does physical pain. So when you've lived through years of micro-rejections, those wounds don't just heal over, they sensitize you. Then you add in structural ableism. Everywhere you go, the world is calibrated for neurotypical norms, social scripts, work expectations, unspoken rules about timing, eye contact, tone of voice, communication styles. And when you fall outside those lines, the consequences are often subtle but sharp. You're called unprofessional, unreliable, rude, dramatic, lazy. The labels vary, but the message is the same. You're not doing this right, and it's your fault. That's how internalized ableism begins to grow. You stop asking why the system is built this way. You start assuming you're the one who's broken. Eventually, you begin rejecting yourself before anyone else has the chance to. You preempt the judgment. You apologize for your needs before stating them. You assume the worst because your nervous system has adapted to see danger where too often there has been danger. And when RSD is triggered, you're not just responding to one email, one piece of feedback, one awkward conversation. You're responding to the whole history your body has carried. All the times you were misunderstood, dismissed, or shamed, and had to swallow that experience quietly just to stay in the room. When RSD kicks in, it doesn't look the same for everyone, but the inner experience is almost always intense and consuming. For some, it's a full body shutdown. You go quiet in a conversation, not because you've lost interest, but because your brain is suddenly flooded with anxiety. You're reviewing every word you just said, trying to guess if it landed wrong. The fear of saying something else that might make things worse keeps you frozen. For others, it turns outward. You get defensive. You over-explain. You feel cornered by a perceived judgment and rush to justify yourself, sometimes before the other person has even finished their sentence. Then there's the spiral. You smile, nod, keep it together on the outside, but as soon as you're alone, you collapse into rumination. You go over the interaction again and again. The tone, the wording, the pause. You start rewriting the conversation in your head, searching for the exact moment you failed. And this doesn't just last a few minutes. The spiral can eat hours, days. You might reread the message 20 times trying to decode whether someone's mad at you. You might draft a response, delete it, rewrite it, decide to say nothing at all, and then obsess about whether silence made it worse. It's exhausting, having a nervous system on high alert all the time. The stress response doesn't know the difference between a social injury and a physical threat. It just knows there was a hit, and now it's trying to figure out how to stop the next one. And so, to cope, many people with RSD start avoiding situations that might expose them to rejection at all. They pull away from friendships. They leave texts unanswered because they're terrified of saying the wrong thing. They ghost creative projects they were once excited about. They talk themselves out of applying for jobs, auditions, scholarships, anything that carries even the faintest risk of being told no. Sometimes they keep showing up, but only after a lot of practice, building elaborate internal safety systems like scripting every social interaction, mentally rehearsing multiple outcomes, preemptively apologizing, endlessly checking for signs of approval or disapproval. These are adaptations, and they make sense in the context of a brain that's learned over time that rejection isn't just unpleasant, it's dangerous. And when others don't understand this pattern, they misinterpret it. They see avoidance and assume apathy. They see defensiveness and assume ego. They see over-explanation and assume manipulation. They see silence and assume you just don't care. But none of those readings are accurate when RSD is in the picture. What's really happening is a person is trying to manage pain in advance, trying to protect themselves from feeling shattered again. Living with RSD is already difficult, but it becomes so much heavier when the people around you don't recognize it, when they meet your vulnerability with dismissal, impatience, or even ridicule. You say, "That felt really hard for me," and they respond with, "It wasn't that deep." You express hurt, and they tell you to stop taking everything so personally. You try to explain how something triggered anxiety, and they accuse you of looking for problems that aren't there. This reinforces a message many neurodivergent people have received since early childhood. Your feelings are wrong, your reactions are wrong, and your way of being is wrong. And in cultures that prize individualism, emotional control, and so-called resilience, that message becomes even more cutting. You're told that other people can handle criticism just fine, that other people bounce back from failure, that discomfort builds character. But the way resilience is defined in these environments often excludes neurodivergent experiences entirely. You're not resilient unless you react in a neurotypical way, measured, unbothered, emotionally neutral. Anything more expressive, more intense, more complicated than that, you're seen as unstable, irrational, attention-seeking. So the bar for what counts as reasonable shrinks. The acceptable emotional range gets narrower, and anyone who falls outside of it is expected to adapt, apologize, or disappear. That's where the deeper harm happens, not in the original rejection, but in the assumption that struggling with rejection is a sign of personal weakness, as if sensitivity to social threat is a moral failing rather than a trauma response, as if needing reassurance means you're immature, as if being affected by a harsh tone means you're fragile, as if asking for clarification means you're difficult. And when neurodivergents try to name these patterns, when we try to explain that we're not just being sensitive, we're responding to a lifetime of cumulative judgment, those explanations are often met with skepticism. People nod, but they don't adjust. They say, well, you just have to learn to deal with it. This teaches us that our needs are inconvenient. Eventually, many of us stop explaining because we're tired of being seen as the problem when we're already carrying so much. When rejection sensitivity is misunderstood on the outside, it starts to reshape your inner world. You start to question your reality. You wonder if you're really too sensitive, too reactive, too much. You replay conversations in your head, not just to understand them, but to dissect yourself, looking for evidence that you're at fault for feeling the way you do. And the more that feedback loops back in on itself, the more the shame sets in. Shame doesn't just say, that interaction went badly. Shame says, you are the reason it went badly. It takes a moment of distress and turns it into a story about your character. You begin preemptively shrinking to avoid triggering that shame again. You stop expressing yourself when you're hurt. You filter your language to sound calmer, less intense, more digestible. You start rehearsing every interaction in your head before it even happens. This is self-policing, and it becomes second nature. You learn how to soften yourself just enough to avoid being dismissed, while still trying to stay connected to your truth. But over time, that balance becomes harder to hold. The more you mask your reactions, the more disconnected you feel from your own needs. And underneath all of this is something heavier: internalized ableism. When the world consistently treats your emotional responses as wrong, your brain starts doing the same thing. You begin to side with your critics. You hear that inner voice saying, "You're overreacting again. You shouldn't feel this way. People don't want to deal with this side of you. You're making it worse." And that voice doesn't show up as a choice. It's the internal echo of 1,000 social messages you never asked for, but learned to carry anyway. So even when someone is kind, you might not believe it. Even when feedback is fair, you might still spiral. Even when no one is upset, your body may still brace for fallout. That's what makes RSD so heavy. Even as you're responding to rejection from others, you're fighting rejection from inside yourself too. There's no quick fix for rejection sensitivity, no script or mindset shift that makes the fear disappear. But there are ways to soften the edge, to give the nervous system more safety, and to make space for recovery instead of punishment. Let's start with what can help from the inside. Internal strategies. One of the most powerful shifts is naming what's happening, to understand that it makes sense, that your reaction is patterned, learned, predictable, that it didn't come from weakness, it came from experience. Sometimes just saying to yourself, "This feels like rejection, and it's triggering my body's alarm system," is enough to interrupt the spiral, even slightly. That pause creates breathing room, and in that room, you could begin to ask yourself gentler questions. What am I afraid this moment says about me? What part of me is trying to protect me right now? What response would I want from someone else if they were in my shoes? The goal isn't to erase the sensitivity, but to respond to it with care instead of critique. Self-compassion doesn't cancel accountability. It does make it survivable. You can still reflect, you can still grow, but you don't have to attack yourself to get there. Regulation techniques can also be helpful, especially ones that work with your body, not just your thoughts. For some, that looks like movement, walking, stretching, shaking out tension. For others, it's breath work, music, weighted blankets, petting your dog or cat, saying things out loud to another human who gets it. The more you practice noticing and tending to your system before the spiral goes too deep, the more capacity you have to stay connected to yourself and to the people around you. Interpersonal strategies. Now, let's talk about what helps on the outside. If you care about someone who struggles with RSD, don't tiptoe, but do approach with clarity and kindness. Unclear feedback often hits the hardest. Vague comments like, "we need to talk," or "this isn't working," can send the nervous system into freefall. Instead, name your intention. "Hey, I want to share some feedback, and I want you to know upfront I care about this relationship, and I'm not angry. There's something I want to work on with you, but I want you to feel safe having the conversation." That kind of framing helps people stay present enough to listen, instead of spiraling into shame. And when someone does react strongly, don't assume they're being manipulative. Don't shame them for making things about them. They're trying to make sense of a threat that feels real in their body. One of the most powerful things you can do is affirm their experience without turning it into a debate. You can say, "That makes sense," knowing what you've been through. You don't need to justify your reaction to me. "We're okay. I'm not going anywhere." Simple language. And if you've hurt someone unintentionally, listening matters more than defending. You don't have to agree with their interpretation to acknowledge the impact, especially with neurodivergent people who are used to having their experiences picked apart or dismissed. Rejection sensitivity often gets framed as a personal problem, something the individual is meant to fix, manage, or hide. But we don't develop these patterns in isolation, and we shouldn't have to carry them alone. Yes, we each have work to do, work around regulation, self-trust, boundary setting, self-compassion. What also matters is the environment we're trying to do that work inside. If the culture around you treats emotion as weakness, treats intensity as a flaw, and treats feedback as a weapon, you're not going to feel safe enough to grow. And it won't matter how many skills you learn if the system keeps re-traumatizing you. Support has to be a two-way commitment. We, as neurodivergent people, commit to doing what we can to understand our patterns, to take accountability for our responses, even when they're intense, to seek support, set limits, and practice self-care without waiting for permission. But we also need the people around us, neurotypicals, institutions, families, workplaces, to stop interpreting our pain as a character flaw, to stop using tone policing, performative patience, or weaponized neutrality to shut us down. We need others to choose curiosity over judgment, to listen all the way through, to name things gently but clearly, to make small human adjustments that reduce harm, just like we already do for people in countless other situations. We build ramps for strollers, for walkers, for wheelchairs, because we recognize that equity means meeting people where they are at. Rejection sensitivity deserves the same thoughtfulness. That doesn't mean we tiptoe. It does mean we speak with care. It doesn't mean we avoid hard conversations. It means we hold them in ways that don't rely on shame. And it doesn't mean we erase our differences. It means we honor them without assuming someone's way of reacting is wrong just because it's unfamiliar. When we do that, when we start designing relationships and systems that account for emotional diversity, we make space for all kinds of people to belong, to stay in the room, to keep trying, even when it's hard. So if you live with RSD, or you're just starting to realize that's what's been going on, what's helped you? Have you found ways to explain your sensitivity to others? Have you found people who get it? Have you been able to show up for yourself in new ways without apology? And if this video resonated, if you want more content with real talk, real strategies, and a deep respect for autistic and ADHD ways of being, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.